Did you know that 70% of us suffer from imposter syndrome? A fear that you don't know enough, aren't good enough, and might get found out is all too common. Even those seemingly at the top of their game aren't immune to feeling like they're an imposter or stealing a wage. That feeling where you just feel like somebody is going to uncover that you actually don't know anything and will call you a fraud. Although some manage to put their doubts aside, for others the long-term impact can be quite detrimental, stop them from learning and pursuing promotions or leaving jobs altogether. Imposter syndrome refers to an internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. Whilst this definition is usually narrowly applied to intelligence and achievement, it has links to perfectionism and the social context. To put it simply, imposter syndrome is the experience of feeling like a phony. You feel as though at any moment you are going to be found out as a fraud, like you don't belong anywhere or you only got there through dumb luck. It can affect anyone, no matter their social status, their work background, their skill level, or their degree of expertise. So how does imposter syndrome manifest itself to begin with? Well, there are a number of ways it can do that. You could be a perfectionist, so everything has to be absolutely spot on before you decide to go for it. You've got massively high expectations, or conversely, you could be an expert, so you need to know everything about a particular topic before you pursue it. You might not want to speak up in a particular scenario in a group setting because you don't feel like you have all the facts yet. The chances are you are just as much of an expert as anybody else, and your opinion is definitely valid. You could be a natural genius. Now, these are the people that often find things naturally quite easy, but when things don't go their way, they struggle to pursue them or struggle to continue without that feeling of not feeling like they're good enough. Soloists, on the other hand, tend to want to do everything on their own. If something doesn't quite go according to plan and they feel like they have to ask for help, that can really knock them back and make them feel like an imposter, saying, why can't I do that? And then finally, there's the Superman, Superwoman type approach, where there's an expectation that they have to be achieving a lot and they have to do everything and they have to exceed everybody's expectations, almost just as that of a superhero. But just like many of you, I have battled with imposter syndrome too. I've suffered when meeting new people in new jobs who knew different things to me. My mind would automatically decide that they are smarter than me, and as such meant I wouldn't ask questions in meetings. This was my way of protecting myself. If I didn't ask a potentially silly question, then no one would judge my ability and in turn judge me. This was compounded when moving into a more senior position where the expectation is that you should know the answer. But I've reflected on this over the years, and I know that if I have a question in mind, the chances are that so will someone else. By not asking questions in this instance, I am limiting my own potential and with it, my ability to learn. I'm also not being true to myself. If I want to be as valuable as possible in the role, especially as a leader, I want to create an environment that others can ask questions, and if this means asking questions which show I don't know, then I will encourage the others to do the same. This is all with a view of helping others grow. I mean, another example of imposter syndrome for me is also thinking that I've made it through my previous role without being found out. It's a bit like a survival thing, really, like a fight or flight. By the time I moved on, there was almost a sort of palpable moment of relief in that I'd made it, effectively all before it falls apart. I mean, this is completely irrational, but that's how I felt. That's why it's really important to know whether something is fact or opinion. Do you have any evidence to back up what you think is true? Are you jumping to a conclusion based on your opinion rather than facts supporting this? If there are no facts to support your opinions, then why believe it? By taking your opinion as fact, you are limiting your growth mindset. You are holding yourself back, and in this situation, simply no one wins. In the spirit of sharing, here's a tip that I'm pretty certain no one will tell you. Your leaders don't know all the answers. They may give off the impression that they do, but they won't. I mean, there will be a facade, and if they are being true to themselves, they will know there are blind spots in their knowledge. The problem is, leaders are viewed as know-it-alls, and anyone that doesn't is perceived to be a failure. I mean, this is nonsense. A truly great leader needs to be vulnerable to succeed, and this is all part of that. So with all that in mind, how can we deal with imposter syndrome? Well, the first way is to reframe your perspective. In the incredible TED Talk by psychologist Susan David, which has been viewed over an amazing 10 million times, the idea of seeing your doubts as data was first proposed. One of the key takeaways from this talk is the perspective with how we see our doubts. That can affect how we feel. Now, I know this can sound all a bit woo-woo, but if you are reflecting back on a situation where you were giving yourself a hard time, or you feel like you didn't do as good a job as you'd like to have done, try to view it with the perspective of an objective bystander. Although it sounds simple, seeing your situation from someone completely unrelated to you and from a totally different viewpoint can be really helpful. By distancing yourselves from a situation, in this instance your own actions, can help us see a situation more realistically and resist being too hard on themselves. Giving ourselves a really hard time is often the default reaction. This is especially true when considering how a bunch of activities were performed. For example, when 9 of the 10 things went really well and only 1 went okay. It is jumping to the conclusion that everything is shit and we're just not good enough as when the doubts are creeping through. Secondly, it is all about you and saying your name out loud. Yes, I know it sounds a bit ridiculous and can feel ridiculous when doing it, but sports stars or people working in high-pressure environments will often use this technique to calm their nerves. In the world of sports, this is known as visualization. Seeing what you're going to do before you do it. The likes of Michael Jordan, Lewis Hamilton and Serena Williams are all famous for mentally preparing for the challenges ahead, often calling their names out loud to quell any negative thoughts that may pop into their heads. You may not be preparing for a tennis Grand Slam final or a Formula 1 race, but the practice can be really powerful in everyday life, especially if you are suffering from doubt. Rather than thinking, I'm not going to be good enough, or I'm really nervous, actually say, well, in this instance it's me obviously, Brendan, you know you can do this. Or, Bren, you know you've got a good record, be positive. It would be silly to think that by simply saying our names out loud this will solve all our problems, but changing how we view our own capabilities in a more positive light can help build mental strength and feel more confident in certain situations. Even if you just say it in your head, it can be a small way of reminding yourself what you can do versus what you feel like you can't. And that's it. Remember that if you are feeling like an imposter, it means you have some degree of success in your life that you are trying to attribute to luck. Try instead to turn that feeling into one of gratitude. Take a moment to look at what you have accomplished in your life and be grateful. Don't be held back by your fear of being found out. Instead, lean into that feeling and get at its roots. Let your guard down and let others see the real you. If you've done all these things and still feel like you're being held back through imposter syndrome, it's important to speak to somebody in a professional manner. But if you liked this video, I would highly recommend this one here, where I talk about how to cope when you feel like you're going nowhere fast, because I think you'll find it really useful. But with that, have a great day, and I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.